Now the video that I'm shooting, the idea of this is to show what's involved in changing out the sprocket on this is a GS1100, but this is pretty typical of any modern bike, any even old bike. Now the first thing, of course, most people don't ever take the cover off unless they have to and clean in here. So usually if you've got a bike that for all purposes hasn't been cleaned in 10 years, it's good to put a rag down here just to catch all the goop so it doesn't fall on the floor or on your rug or whatever, if you're doing this in your kitchen or your living room or whatever. Now, what I wanted to do in this case, I wanted to put a 16 tooth, a 15 tooth is stock. The reason for 1 tooth larger sprocket is this bike in particular has kind of an annoying buzz right about 70 to 75 miles an hour where you do a lot of your cruising, highway cruising. So the bigger sprocket should push that up into the 80s where you do a limited amount of time, and hopefully it'll cure that little buzz. Not a big deal, not something you couldn't live with, not something that you'd sell a bike because of it, but I've heard from other people that have the exact bike that the 1 tooth bigger counter sprocket cured the problem. And for $14, the part is $14 from Dennis Kirk. Now, the countershaft sprockets are tricky when you're dealing with an older bike. This bike is an 82, and they tend to be hard to find. There's only one problem. If you look through the cross-reference chart, the one on Dennis Kirk anyway, you find out the same sprocket fits this bike as fits a modern Hayabusa, of which there are millions. So this sprocket is a very common thing, not common to fit an 82, but the same sprocket that fits a Hayabusa does fit this. Now, kind of a tricky thing sometimes getting a nut off, because if this washer is peened back in such a way that you try to get a screwdriver under there, and when you do, you wind up chewing this all to holy hell and back. So what I did, I made a little tool from a piece of drill rod, and I put an angle on it so that kind of got that lip up relatively easily. Now what I do too is I take the old Simple Green and some brake part cleaner or whatever, let it soak for a minute or two, use some compressed air. That usually does a good job of getting most of the goop off and down onto the rug or down onto the floor. And of course, having a compressed air nozzle with a long tube helps you get in there and get as much of the loose stuff out as you can. Now, I have heard people say that when this comes from the factory, getting this nut off is really difficult. Well, I've had this nut off 3 or 4 times already to change various things, and on both of the GS's that I own. And what makes this really, really easy is an air hammer and a 32 millimeter half-inch drive socket. With that in mind, a lot of times what you want to do, put the bike in 5th gear, put a rag on both sides of the sprocket to just lock it up. This way, what happens if you hit the air hammer and the bike starts walking forward, can be a problem. This eliminates the problem, of course. So once that nut is off, even if you have to really fight it, you notice this one has been off already, so you see it's all little from a screwdriver being chewed up. No reason you can't use it after I clean it up. I'll just use one or the other flats. In this case, I've used 2 flats. I use both of them. Well, I don't want to take any chance this comes off, of course. And this is the old 15 tooth counter sprocket. Now this bike had been converted years ago. I got to look at my log and see what year it was converted from 630 to 530. So the chain is so much lighter and so much better. Modern chains are so much better than the chains of the 80s. The original reason they put these heavy chains on some of the big touring bikes and some of the big Kawasaki's and Suzuki's of the day, because Honda had a problem using 530 chains. They used to wipe out the case when the chain broke. So I guess that was just a precautionary thing. But again, these counter sprockets from Dennis Kirk this one was $14 anyway. Once that, and you can see I spent a little time off camera here cleaning this whole area up, I always encourage other people to get it as clean as possible. The reason is that the grease that gets in here, no matter what kind of chain wax or chain lube you use, dirt and grit wind up in here. When they stick to oily surfaces, it turns to grinding compound. And so then what happens is your beautiful, nice new sprocket and relatively nice new chain are running through grinding compound every time you ride. So having that clean is a nice feature. Now, I look back at the old, this was funny that Luciano had a, I'm trying to think what, it was a big Kawasaki in '82. It had a 630 chain, and I saved all the old 630 sprockets in case anybody wanted them. Now, these sprockets have 30,000 miles on them. I did the conversion right about 30,000 miles, but I did save them, and you could see that they were pretty well worn at 30,000. Now, of course, the rest is just buttoning it up, adjusting the chain, lubing the chain, and then the best part of all, the best part of dealing with any modification, it gives me a great little excuse to take a ride. And once that's all buttoned up and if the floor is vacuumed up, and there's nothing better than knowing you've done some maintenance or something that'll prolong the life of the bike. Now, in this case, what I was really excited to try, see, the reason they have a 15-tooth counter sprocket is pretty simple. The factory sets the bike up with the idea in mind that most or some people ride with a passenger. Now, with a passenger, if you're on a hill, yeah, a 15-tooth is probably better than a 16-tooth. But when you're riding with one person basically all the time, and I don't have foot pegs on any of my bikes, so if somebody's riding, they better just hold their feet up in the air. The idea is most of my, in fact all of my riding is done with one person on a bike. So the 16-tooth is really an asset. And what it does, it gives me a longer first gear, which with the stock gearing, first gear you go 10 feet and it's ready for second gear. So, and I understand why they did that. And some people ride with some really big passengers. I mean, I can imagine if you're a heavyweight and you have a heavyweight passenger, maybe even one a 14-tooth, I don't know. And the other thing too is, keep in mind in the 80s, this was a really big time for everybody wanting to lower their ET into the 11s, and probably that was a better thing if you were drag racing. But boy, once you get going and once you go take that ride, and that ride is just to me, this worked out so well. I took it many times into that area where it used to buzz, and that area is now about 10 miles an hour higher up into the 80s, where I don't do a lot of riding. Most of the riding you do on a highway is 65, 70, maybe 75, and that buzz would come in right about 75. It was kind of annoying. This sprocket change, $14, totally eliminated it. Now, as a side benefit, I'm sure one of the things that puts a little less wear and tear on a motor, which in my case is I don't think is really a factor, but for some people it would be if you're doing really a lot of long distance touring, I guess. But this time of year in a park, you get out with a bike that now you have a good excuse to get a 100-mile test ride on a bike. I don't know that you really even need an excuse. But the leaves are starting to change. The bike is running great. We're looking forward to this weekend more than any. This weekend coming up is going to be the peak of the leaf changing. And the only downside of that, of course, where we ride is that we have so many tourists and people that have never seen a tree that live in a city, never seen a bush or a green leaf or an orange leaf. So a lot of times you have to deal with extra traffic, but the beauty all around you makes it well worthwhile. And as Joe Roselli and I got caught in some traffic where the people were heading up to Greenwood Lake, we just turned around and found another road. And that's really one of the nice things about our part of the country. There's really a bottomless pit of nice places to ride. And I think even Lauren enjoyed the ride. And we hope you'll be riding with us this weekend. Enjoy it while you can. And our part of the country has a unique feature of the leaves changing, and I for one enjoy it. Hope you enjoy it too. And every time I pass one of these really beautiful trees, I think, well, what a shame it would be to go through life and never see one. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video.